Is there an actual proper way to use the dark side? And is Baylan's skull using it for righteousness? The dark side is the most alluring challenge that even the most seasoned Jedi Masters have to continually resist. We've seen its ability to corrupt and infect even the most strong-willed of Force users. But is there a righteous way to use the dark side without being overcome by its power? Well, today, students of the Force, let's discuss this idea, and specifically how Baylan's skull may be trying to use it as a force for good. First, let's examine Legends. In Legends, Luke Skywalker claims that no single Force ability is inherently good or evil, but rather, it is the intention behind how one wields it. In fact, Luke preached learning both sides of the Force in order to create a well-rounded, educated Jedi who understood the Force in all its aspects. And in Legends, we have several cases like this. Luke's order was able to produce Jedi who were much more emotionally developed. They were more peace-minded guardians than the Jedi of the Republic and Republic Classic era. This was created and done through proper education rather than succumbing to the dogma of the old Jedi, acknowledging the dark side, not pretending that it did not exist. In canon though, the answer seems to be a bit more muddled. We know that in canon, Luke still has a complete aversion to the dark side, and sees it as its own entity, not to be trifled with. Baylan, however, seems to be one of the most successful at utilizing the dark side without completely succumbing to its allure, and in his own mind, has noble justifications for his actions. Baylan tells Ahsoka that her and Anakin's lineage is one of death and destruction, and his view is entirely understandable. Anakin fell to the dark side and placed the galaxy under lockdown for 2 decades, while Ahsoka learned from the best to be a Jedi Maverick and would disobey orders when deemed necessary. From Baylan's perspective, the two had no discipline or structure, and were a disgrace to what it meant to truly be a Jedi. What's interesting though, is that he seems to have maintained these principles over the course of his life, even after dabbling in the dark side. Most dark side users we see become driven by greed and power, seeking only to dominate and possess. On a very rare occasion, however, we do see a dark side user who is driven by more noble purposes, and who is seemingly able to tame the darkness within them. Take for example someone on the extreme end of this in Dooku. Make no mistake, before we get into this, we are not justifying Dooku's actions, and we do fully believe that by the end, he was corrupted by the dark side. But that will be important for Baylan as well. On paper though, Count Dooku, much like Baylan, had a valid point to be made. He sought to liberate the Confederacy from a republic that was broken, discriminatory, and most egregiously, ineffective. He believed that the greatest problem of the Jedi Order was the Republic. He saw how the Jedi had become stagnant in their ways and complacent with the will of a government. This enraged Dooku because he saw millions killed because of the ineptitude of the Order. And to Dooku, the dark side offered him a solution and a means to an end. Dooku was able to use the dark side as a tool to further a goal that wasn't inherently selfish and considered the well-being of others in the beginning. This is the primary reason why Dooku never showcased the yellow Sith eyes, as he wasn't truly driven by the same dark emotions as his Sith counterparts in Sidious and Vader. As put by the ancient Sith though, the dark side is an infection that no true Sith would ever wish to be rid of. Dooku became corrupted and corroded by the very will of the dark side and the calls of its power. He began a political idealist, but he very much finished as a Sith. While we don't know the true scopes of Baylan's plans and motives, we do have a theory on what he might want, and it is very similar to that of Dooku. One of the most prominent theories is that he is seeking access to the world between worlds, but for a full breakdown on why he desires this, be sure to check out our video on that. We propose though, that it could be for a few different reasons, and the most pressing is that he wants to restore the Jedi Order. Baylan was driven into hiding after the events of Order 66, and we can only speculate as to what he had to do in order to survive. But we know that part of his survival was embracing the dark side. We know that this was a time of great darkness for all Jedi, and very few were able to live to see the fall of the Empire. If Baylan has some notion of the world between worlds though, he believes that he can use it to alter the past. Then he might be able to seek to stop the Empire from ever coming into power in the first place, to stop Vader. On the surface, this seems to be in line with his character, who still very much complies with the Jedi ideals of peace and justice, even if he has to take darker means in order to achieve this goal. This brings us back around to the central question though, which is there a way to use the dark side without being corrupted by it? And is Baylan doing it? Although it might be possible in theory, the dark side is corrosive, even if one can use its power for a short time without ultimately succumbing to its will. With that said though, it wears a user down over time. It literally unbalances them. A great example of this would be the Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Whenever Maul twirls him into a rage, it unbalances him and makes him weak. In contrast to this, one of the major reasons that Kenobi himself said that he was able to be Anakin was because he completely separated Anakin from Darth Vader in his mind. When he dueled Anakin, he no longer thought of him as his brother or his apprentice. He blocked off his emotions entirely. He was perfectly balanced, realizing the faults of the dark side and how eventually it would weaken him. But back to Baylan. The use of the dark side would slowly erode into practicing more and more abilities over time, leaning into the power. What's interesting about this is we see this a lot more with Shin than we do with Baylan. Shin seems to be much more ruthless than Baylan is, with far less remorse for her actions. Baylan though, as her master, does not stop her. This seems to indicate that on some level, Baylan doesn't find her actions to be abhorrent as he likely would have if he were a Jedi still. First, he tolerates this, but then what else will he tolerate afterwards? What will he himself eventually do? Even Dooku became more violent as the war went on. The dark side corroded his former spirit. Even if he didn't outward show it, it was the same degree as someone like Vader or Maul. Just like Baylan, Dooku too was a former Jedi, but he was the ideal Jedi of his era and represented everything that a knight should be, at least if you asked him. Upon being confronted on Geonosis though, Dooku had no issue with slaying almost 200 Jedi, all in the name for the greater good. The dark side caused Dooku to compromise, just as it will cause Baylan, and is causing Baylan to compromise. Dooku believed the war was noble and would have a virtuous outcome. The fact still remains though that he got complacent with violence and bloodshed. This forever separated him from the light side and the way of the Jedi. When Dooku was a master, we saw him use darker abilities including force choking and even force lightning. Dooku was ultimately able to be talked down by Qui-Gon Jinn. This though was only a momentary cure. The dark side degraded Dooku, and as Dooku went from force choking a senator to genocide of the Jedi, all by listening to the dark urges within him. If Baylan is trying to restore the Jedi Order, or perhaps create a new order, he is doing so for an inherently selfish cause. We know a few things about Baylan. He is driven by selfish emotion and hatred for Ahsoka and Vader. He would be driven by the pain and anger that the Empire caused him, and he would try to restore the galaxy based on his own emotional investment. Since he is already affiliated with the dark side, investing in strong emotions is a very dangerous game to play. He has tricked himself thus far into believing that the dark side could be noble, but we understand that Luke's assertion is canon and is much more clear, and the Lucan canon believes that the dark side should never be used. Baylan will likely hold out for a little longer, but the dark side has shown before that it is simply too strong of a pull to be resisted indefinitely. What this doesn't necessarily rule out, however, is the possibility of redemption. Just as Darth Vader, one completely steeped in the dark side, could turn back to the light, so too Baylan could be brought back. In fact, although he is dark side in allegiance clearly, he is closer to the light than nearly any other dark side wielder that we've seen, a fact that makes him exceptionally interesting. With that said though, the dark side is a danger because it offers one many things, including power, glory, and control. But it also infects, corrodes, and destroys oneself. To answer the question, anyone who truly uses the dark side cannot use it righteously. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the dark side and how Baylan is wielding it? Do you think that there is a good way to use the dark side itself? Or does this stand in direct opposition of all things good? Also, what are your thoughts between Dooku and Baylan? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel, and may the Force be with you.